Hey guys, Mitch Maley, and welcome to another edition of Punk Rock Politics. We've got the Friday rundown. A lot of things happening in D.C. this morning. Pre-dawn, the Senate took a vote to pass a resolution that will effectively start the budget reconciliation process of getting COVID relief passed. So this allows the Senate, controlled by Democrats really via the tie-breaking vote, to get COVID relief passed while avoiding the filibuster. And the filibuster is a procedure rule. It's not a law. But what it does is it prevents a party from ending debate on traditional legislation without having 60 votes. So a good-sized majority there. And with Democrats only having 50 and the tie-breaking vote, they're able to move things that fit into a narrow window that affect the budget, and it has to be demonstrated that that can happen in order to pass this kind of legislation. So this only starts the process, which of course is going to be interrupted by the Senate impeachment trial of President Trump. So we're looking at March or April before this will get passed. And of course, this is the legislation that includes the next round of stimulus checks. So if you recall, President Biden was in Georgia campaigning for Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock, and saying, if you elect these two senators, we will immediately be sending out $2,000 checks. And of course, that immediately got walked back after Ossoff and Warnock won by saying, really what we're going to do is send out a $1,400 check to get you to a total of $2,000 with the $600 you got back in December. So already seeming like a bait and switch, but rather than taking an up-down vote on the actual stimulus, which they could have passed, all indications were that enough Republicans would have came over on that if it was standalone just for the stimulus to avoid the filibuster, to get those 10 Republicans that would have gotten you 60 votes to end the debate. By not doing that, I really think that Biden administration is setting them up for some very valid criticism in terms of, not coming through on that big promise. So we've already had numerous amendments added to this during a process called Vote-A-Rama, when budget resolutions like that happen in order to during reconciliation. Senators from either party can offer them, and there are a number of them in there, and one of them is going to be a debate essentially on who gets those $1,400 stimulus checks and whether or not they're actually $1,400, because Republicans are asking for $1,000 instead and limiting it to individuals with a $50,000 taxable income or couples with $100,000. So very different than what was promised. And I really think it's a big strategic mistake on behalf of Democrats, because listen, if you could do just one thing, if you're the Biden administration and all you do during 2021 is pass adequate stimulus and keep the economy moving until the point when the vaccine, distribution has taken enough effect that the economy is growing at the 5% that we're predicting at this point. Once that happens, and then also, manage that vaccine distribution well in order to allow that to happen and happen at least on the timeline they're talking until, maybe September when a real reopening, full reopening of the economy can happen. If you do those two things, if you just keep the economy juiced a little bit, keep people who are hurting having some dollars in their pocket that they can spend, and then not screw up vaccine distribution, I really don't think it's unrealistic to think that Joe Biden could have an 80% approval rating at the point. He's at 61% with numbers that just came out. That's higher than Trump had during his entire presidency. Trump never hit a 50% approval rating and was as low as 35. So just removing that craziness and just, I think a lot of it's the relief following the Capitol insurrection attempt. The Biden administration is sitting on an unnaturally high approval rating. If they were able to do those two things, I really think they would be able to pass almost anything, come late 2021, certainly in 2022. But, this process of, allowing that stimulus to get caught up in the politicization of it is, I think, a strategic error. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives did go ahead and strip Marjorie Taylor Greene, the so-called QAnon congresswoman who was just elected from Georgia in 2020, of her committee assignments. After Greene, of course, it was revealed that prior to being elected, she had, not only embraced a number of embarrassing conspiracy theories in addition to just QAnon in general, but including the absurd notion that the California wildfires might be started by Jewish space lasers that are clearing the land for high-speed rail. So really nonsensical things like that, as well as endorsing calls for violence on members of the House, including, possibly assassinating House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So she was removed, but that was, again, almost completely by Democrats. We only had 11 Republican Congress members who were willing to strip her of those assignments. Ironically, Liz Cheney was not one of them. And you have 61 Republicans who voted to oust Liz Cheney from her leadership position as number 3 in the House. Very, very interesting. She survived that vote and will remain in leadership, even though she refused to apologize for voting to impeach Donald Trump. That's where those calls for punishing her went. So where we're at in the Republican Party right now is members of Congress and seemingly Republican voters are much more angry at Liz Cheney for voting to impeach Donald Trump for inciting an insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th than they are upset about Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has been, a school shooting denier, suggested that the Parkland shooting and Sandy Hook were staged false flag events that involve crisis actors. There we're at that. So, with 11 members only voting in favor of having her committee assignments stripped, I think it's probably unlikely that she's going to be chastened by that. So expect more craziness from the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing of the party, which is being supported by former President Donald Trump and creating really a divide in the Republican Party. And finally, a Brazilian company that designs vote counting software is suing Fox News over its help in proliferating conspiracy theories that supposed friends of socialist leader Hugo Chavez, who died in 2013, had started this company and were involved in the supposed rigging of the presidential election in swing states in particular. Smartmatic, this Brazilian company, is asking for $2.7 billion in damage, saying they were basically eviscerated in terms of being used, their software being used in voting machines. The only business the company actually did in the November 2020 elections in the United States was a contract for LA County to help them count their votes. And California, of course, was never in play, was always going to go to Biden. They weren't involved in any of the swing states. So it's going to be an interesting case. Ironically, Lin Wood, a Georgia attorney who spent months falsely claiming voter fraud was responsible for President Joe Biden's victory in Georgia, is being investigated himself by the Republican Georgia Secretary of State for possibly committing voter fraud. Wood cast his vote in Georgia despite evidence that he'd already relocated to South Carolina prior to the election. Possibly the irony of all ironies. And we'll just have to wait to see what happens with that. That's it for the Friday Roundup. Thanks for joining us. Of course, you could join us on the podcast today, which just dropped. That's on YouTube, on our channel, where you can see some more videos. It's also on punkrockpolitics.com, where you can get other great news. And, of course, the podcast is also on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Thanks, guys.